When my parents passed away, I didn't cry at the funeral. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because I was too numb to feel anything. After years of supporting them, taking care of their paperwork, and bailing my addict brother out of rehab, I thought I'd at least be remembered in their will. Instead, they left everything, $4.2 million, to him. When I confronted my aunt, she said, "You should be grateful. Kyle needs it more." Grateful for being discarded like trash. That's when I knew I had to do something they'd never forget. My name is Lauren. I'm 34 and I live in Boulder, Colorado. I work as a financial manager at a mid-sized investment firm, and I'm the kind of person people call when they're in trouble. Tax season, overdue mortgage, college funds gone wrong. I fix messes. I've always been that way, even when I was a kid, especially in my family. Growing up, I learned very early that stability was a luxury we couldn't afford, not because we were poor, but because emotions ruled the house. My parents, Janet and Robert, were decent people on the surface. Church every Sunday, neighborhood cookouts, polite smiles. But behind closed doors, they lived in a constant state of stress, mostly because of my younger brother, Kyle. Kyle was the storm that never passed. 3 years younger than me, he was the golden child with a broken compass. He was charming, funny, and impulsive to the point of destruction. In high school, he got caught selling prescription pills. My parents cried, paid for a lawyer, and said he just made a mistake. Then came the car accident when he was 19, high on something I couldn't even pronounce. He totaled our family's SUV. Again, they bailed him out, covered the insurance mess, and told me to not make things worse by being judgmental. While Kyle spiraled, I was the one picking up the pieces. I got a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own school supplies. I learned how to cook, how to file taxes, how to keep us from drowning in overdue utility bills. At 22, I was the one driving my mom to her chemo appointments. When Dad had his stroke 5 years later, it was me who handled his estate documents while Kyle was in yet another rehab center in Arizona. But I never complained. I told myself that's what family does, that being reliable mattered more than being celebrated. When people asked why I hadn't married yet, or why I didn't take that job offer in Chicago, I'd smile and say, timing wasn't right. What I didn't say was, I couldn't afford to leave. My family depended on me. Even when I started building a life of my own, I kept one foot in the door. I bought a condo 20 minutes from my parents' house. I checked in every weekend. I made sure their bills were paid. Their appointments were scheduled, and Kyle's records were filed neatly in a folder I kept in my desk drawer. Rehab admission dates, therapy sessions, legal notes. I wasn't trying to be a martyr. I just thought someday someone in my family would turn around and say, "Thank you, Lauren. We couldn't have done it without you." That moment never came. My dad passed away first, quietly in his sleep, after a long decline. I handled the funeral, the obituary, the life insurance. Kyle showed up late, eyes glassy, wearing a rumpled suit and sunglasses indoors. He hugged Mom like he hadn't ghosted her for 2 months. Then he asked if there was anything in Dad's will for him to get back on his feet. Still, I kept the peace. Mom was fragile, grieving. I thought maybe Dad had left something small for Kyle, but I also knew he'd told me years ago that he trusted me to make smart choices with what's left. That felt like his way of saying, "It's yours to manage." When Mom got sick again, Liver failure this time, it was me who coordinated hospice. Me who sat with her every night. Me who held her hand when she took her final breath. Kyle didn't come until 3 days later, claiming he couldn't handle seeing her that way. He stayed just long enough to rummage through the safe in her closet. I should have known something was off when he smirked and said, "Well, at least Mom and Dad finally saw things clearly." But I was too tired to fight, too full of grief to wonder what he meant. It wasn't until 2 weeks after the funeral, when I met with their estate lawyer to finalize paperwork, that everything came crashing down. She looked at me across her oak desk with a mixture of pity and discomfort and said, "Lauren, I want you to prepare yourself. Your parents amended their will last year. They left everything: your father's pension, the house savings accounts, life insurance, everything totaling approximately $4.2 million to Kyle." I stared at her, thinking she must have made a mistake. I even laughed. She didn't. The lawyer slid the document toward me and said softly, they cited Kyle's need for support in rebuilding his life as the primary reason. You weren't mentioned. I walked out of the lawyer's office in a daze, clutching the folder like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My thoughts spun like a broken compass circling the same impossible fact. They gave everything to Kyle. Everything. The house I helped maintain, the life insurance I filed, the retirement accounts I made grow through sound investment advice when Dad trusted me with passwords but not with credit. And now, it was all his. Not even a letter. Not a single acknowledgement. That night, I sat in my living room, wine untouched, staring at my parents' wedding photo. It felt like looking at strangers. All my life, I had believed that doing the right thing mattered, that being the steady, responsible one would mean something in the end. But it didn't. In the end, love wasn't earned. It was handed out like a participation trophy to the loudest, most broken person in the room. A week later, Kyle called me. I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe he'd read the will and realized how messed up it was. Maybe he wanted to split something or offer to sell the house and give me my share. I answered, heart hopeful but guarded. Instead, he started with a laugh. "I just wanted to say thanks, sis, for taking care of all the boring crap. Paperwork, lawyers, funeral arrangements. I mean, you really saved me a headache." I was silent. Then he added, voice smug, "Guess they finally realized who needed the help most. Mom and Dad always knew I had potential. You were just the help. I don't remember what I said next. Maybe nothing. Maybe a stunned whisper. I just remember the sound of him lighting a cigarette, exhaling like he owned the world now. When the call ended, I sat there frozen. His words clung to me like oil. You were just the help. It was like every Christmas I spent alone while Kyle was in rehab. Every birthday I organized, every form I filed, every appointment I took my parents to, it had all been erased in one sentence. And not just by him. By them. I dug through my drawer and pulled out my father's old journals, pages filled with numbers, dates, careful budgeting notes. I flipped to the entry after Kyle's second DUI. Dad had written, "Lauren is handling the fines. Thank God for her." And then a month later, "Kyle deserves another chance. Maybe this time it'll stick." That was the pattern. I cleaned up the mess, and they poured more grace into him. I tried to think logically. Maybe my parents had been manipulated. Maybe they changed the will when they weren't fully lucid. Mom had been on heavy medication near the end. Dad had early signs of cognitive decline, but the signatures were clear. The witnesses were there. It wasn't illegal, just cruel. But what hurt more than the money was the dismissal, the quiet rewriting of our family story, where Kyle was the chosen one and I was the footnote. A few days later, I went to the house, my childhood home, now legally Kyle's. I knocked on the door, unsure what I'd say if he answered. He didn't. Instead, a girl with bleached hair and a hoodie answered. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Is Kyle here?" I asked. She squinted at me. "He's in Vegas. Took off yesterday." I blinked. "Vegas?" She shrugged. "Said he wanted to start living, you know. Said he finally had the cash to do it right." I walked away numb. Vegas, the inheritance, the drugs. It didn't take long before I started hearing things. One of Dad's old coworkers called me out of the blue to say he saw Kyle driving a brand new Mercedes. A neighbor texted a photo of strangers smoking on the lawn of our family home. My cousin messaged me in all caps, "Is it true?" Kyle inherited everything. I stopped responding. I couldn't explain it. I didn't understand it myself. I spent nights lying awake trying to justify their decision. Maybe they thought Kyle would die without the money. Maybe they were manipulated. Maybe, God help me, they thought I didn't need it. But that didn't make it right. It made me feel invisible. The final straw came when I received a letter. Not from Kyle, but from a lawyer and his lawyer demanding that I return some personal items I had taken from the house. Family albums, my mother's jewelry box, a box of old letters Dad had written to her when they were dating. Things I thought I could keep to remember them by. The letter said those were now legally Kyle's property. That was the moment something in me cracked, not with grief, but with clarity. I wasn't the help. I was the foundation. And now they were building a monument to chaos on top of everything I had held together for decades. It wouldn't last. Nothing Kyle touched ever did. I didn't want revenge, not at first. I just wanted the truth to matter. I wanted my parents' memory to mean more than a final insult. I wanted Kyle to look me in the eye and admit he didn't deserve any of it, but he never would. So I did the next best thing. There's a moment when pain becomes so sharp, so total, that it stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like clarity. Mine came 3 days after the lawyer's letter at 2 a.m., sitting on my kitchen floor, flipping through my mother's old recipes I wasn't even legally allowed to own anymore. I was holding a stained card with her lemon bar instructions, and I realized something absurd: Kyle had never even tasted them. He hated lemon desserts, but he owned the box now. And somehow, that simple, stupid fact broke me more than anything else. I put the card down and stared at the floor, remembering every time I held my parents together. Kyle had disappeared for 6 months once. Dad didn't eat for days. I'd bring soup, clean the kitchen, sit next to him, while he watched old westerns in silence. When Kyle came back with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, they threw a small party. Mom made his favorite meatloaf. No one even said thank you to me. And now, their final words, written in legal ink and notarized, said everything I needed to know. He was worth saving. I wasn't worth remembering. A week later, I received another message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Claire. She dated Kyle back in college, before his second stint in rehab. "Hey," she wrote, "saw what happened. I'm sorry. Just be careful, Lauren. He doesn't know how to stop." I stared at the message for minutes. Then I called her. Claire picked up quickly. Her voice cracked like someone who had rehearsed strength for too long. I was 22, she said. He took $3,000 from me, told me it was for rent, then disappeared. I found out later he was using again. She paused. I wanted to believe your parents didn't know how bad it was. But they did, Lauren. They just thought love could fix him. And they wanted so badly to believe you'd always be there to clean up the mess. I exhaled, slowly, bitterness lining my breath. I was always the safety net. Claire made a soft sound. And safety nets don't get thank you cards. They just get stepped on. I started getting Facebook friend requests from strangers, mostly women, some with usernames that sounded fake. I ignored them until I noticed a pattern. They were all friends with Kyle. Curious and cautious, I clicked into a few of their profiles. I wish I hadn't. Photos of parties, expensive liquor, designer bags. One girl tagged Kyle in a post with the caption, "Find yourself a sugar brother." My stomach turned. This wasn't just Kyle blowing through money. This was Kyle turning my parents' legacy into a circus. I confronted him via text. "You're burning through that money faster than you can snort it." He replied, jealous much. "You had your chance to enjoy life. I'm just getting started. No apology, no shame." Just the same entitled grinning ghost of a brother I had covered for since we were teenagers. I stopped sleeping. My work began to suffer. I double-booked client meetings, missed deadlines. My assistant Natalie pulled me aside one afternoon and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I lied. "Just a rough patch." But inside I was unraveling. Not just from grief, but from a grief that had no name. How do you mourn parents who are still alive in your memory but dead in your trust? How do you process being erased? Then came the overdose. It happened in Vegas at a hotel suite Kyle had apparently rented for a week-long business retreat. In reality, it was an all-night binge with people he barely knew. I got the call from a hospital administrator. Kyle had collapsed in a hallway, unresponsive. Someone called 911. He survived. Barely. They pumped his stomach, found 3 substances in his bloodstream. He checked himself out the next day against medical advice. Did he call me? No. Did he thank me for being his emergency contact? Also no. But the hospital bill did come addressed to me. Because of course it did. I stared at the invoice. $58,000. And a note at the bottom. Next of kin, Lauren Mitchell. Not even sister. Just a title. A placeholder. 2 weeks later, I saw Kyle in person for the first time in months. He showed up at my condo, unannounced, wearing sunglasses indoors, and smelling like a perfume counter exploded in his bag. His eyes were jittery, his smile too wide. "Hey, sis," he said like nothing had happened. I didn't let him in. We stood in the hallway. "I heard you got the bill," he said, laughing. "Crazy, right? American healthcare, man. You almost died." He shrugged. "Yeah, but I didn't." I stared at him. "You're burning everything," I whispered. He tilted his head. "Why do you care?" "You didn't want the money. That stopped me cold." "I didn't want the money, Kyle," I said slowly. "I wanted to matter." He blinked. Like the words didn't compute. "You always mattered," he said. "But you were always fine, you know. Mom and Dad didn't worry about you. You didn't need saving." I laughed, a harsh, joyless sound. "And you did. So they saved you, over and over, even if it killed them, even if it erased me." He didn't answer. I closed the door in his face and locked it. That night, I opened the locked box in my closet, the one that held my mother's original medical records and Dad's cognitive decline reports. I had requested them years ago for insurance purposes. Back then, it had just been a precaution. Now, it felt like something more. I flipped through the pages, highlighting dates matching them with the timeline of when the will had been rewritten. Then, I pulled out Kyle's rehab intake forms I had kept by accident during a file transfer. Dated 3 weeks before the will was changed. Then I found something else buried in my inbox. An old email from my father's financial planner asking about a strange withdrawal made without his usual confirmation. The date matched one of Kyle's visits home. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. There were signs of influence, possibly fraud, maybe even undue pressure during a time of declining mental capacity. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I called an estate lawyer the next morning. "Let's talk about undue influence," I said. He listened carefully, asked for documentation. I sent everything. A week later, he called back. "There's a case here," he said. "It's not a slam dunk, but there are enough flags to warrant a deeper dive." And that was the beginning of the shift. The pain didn't go away, but it focused, sharpened, became purpose. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was building a case, not just against Kyle, but against the lie I had been fed since childhood, that being good meant being silent, that being strong meant being invisible, that love was earned by sacrifice, but inheritance came from chaos. Not this time. There's a peculiar calm that comes after the storm of betrayal, like the eerie silence before a second wave hits. Only this time, I wasn't the one being swept away. I was the tide. Once my lawyer confirmed that the estate might be contested due to my father's cognitive decline and potential manipulation by Kyle, I dove headfirst into strategy. I had no illusions this would be quick or clean. But I was done playing the quiet daughter, the forgotten sister. First, we needed evidence not just of Dad's mental capacity, but of Kyle's interference. I began compiling everything, the hospital bills under my name, despite Kyle being the legal heir, texts where he bragged about his spending and mocked my role, a timeline of his visits aligned with Dad's worsening condition, screenshots of social media posts showing his lavish lifestyle, alcohol-fueled parties, luxury items, a sports car. He definitely didn't drive sober. Then came the critical piece. I reached out to Dr. Myers, my father's old neurologist. It took some convincing. But once I explained the situation and that I was considering filing for posthumous estate review, he agreed to write a sworn statement. In it, he noted that at the time of the will's revision, my father was showing signs of moderate cognitive decline, specifically issues with judgment, memory, and susceptibility to influence. While not declared legally incapacitated, he was at increased risk of being taken advantage of. It was more than enough to open the door. My lawyer filed a petition to pause the distribution of the estate and requested an official review of the revised will. Kyle predictably flipped. He called me within an hour of being served. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. "You're seriously trying to steal this from me." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm just making sure Dad's final wishes weren't written under pressure." He laughed bitterly. "Don't act like you care. You just want the money now that you see how much there is." I took a breath. No, Kyle. I want justice. I want the truth. And if you have nothing to hide, this shouldn't scare you." He hung up. The next day, I received a text from an unknown number. "You're going to ruin your family name over this. Walk away before it gets ugly." I showed it to my lawyer. We traced the number to a burner phone. Classic Kyle. The legal process moved slowly but methodically. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were called. One surprise supporter came from an unexpected place: Uncle Greg Dad's estranged older brother. He had been kept at arm's length by the family, mostly due to his open criticism of Kyle. "I warned your parents," he said during our prep call. "Told them Kyle would drain them dry. Your dad didn't want to hear it, but your mom, she knew. She was scared. She said something once about not knowing how to get out of a decision they already made. That line hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just been blind. They had been trapped in guilt, in fear, and false hope." 3 months into the process, the court ordered a temporary freeze on the estate. Kyle lost access to the remaining assets. He responded exactly how you'd expect he vanished. No calls, no social media posts, nothing. Then came the overdraft notices. Apparently, he had tried to float checks, assuming his next inheritance payment would clear. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but also a surge of dread. This wasn't just a game to him. It was his entire lifeline. And now it was slipping, which meant he might become dangerous. Sure enough, one night I came home to find my mailbox pried open and torn up letters scattered on the ground. Someone had urinated on my welcome mat. I didn't need a forensics team to guess who. I filed a police report and installed cameras. My lawyer added it to our file as evidence of harassment. When the court date arrived, I walked in wearing my mother's old silver necklace, the one she used to wear on Sundays. It was the only thing I kept without asking. Kyle arrived looking tired, pale, and jittery. His lawyer whispered to him constantly, but he wouldn't make eye contact with me. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't cry. I told the judge everything, not just about the money, but the years of being the backup plan, the forgotten child, the emotional janitor, cleaning up after Kyle's chaos. "I'm not here because I'm bitter," I said quietly. "I'm here because my parents deserved better than to have their final wishes written under fear and confusion. And I deserved better than to be erased." I looked at Kyle. "I spent my whole life saving you. And you spent yours pretending you were owed more." The courtroom was silent. Even Kyle's lawyer stopped scribbling. A month later, the decision came. The court found sufficient evidence of undue influence and cognitive impairment to invalidate the revised will. The estate would revert to the prior version one drafted 2 years earlier, where the assets were divided 70-30 with me as primary executor and Kyle placed under a financial trust. The judge also appointed a fiduciary to manage Kyle's portion, citing his history of substance abuse and reckless spending. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just cried in relief, in grief, in the exhaustion of finally being seen. But I didn't stop there. With the estate finally under my control, I made one final move. I used a significant portion of the inheritance, around $600,000, to establish a nonprofit financial counseling center for families affected by addiction. We called it Second Ledger. It offers free workshops, budgeting help, and legal aid to families who've lost control of their finances due to an addicted loved one. Because I knew I wasn't the only lonely Lauren out there, someone who loved too hard, gave too much, and was told to be grateful for being overlooked. This wasn't revenge, it was balance. I used to believe closure came from justice alone, from seeing wrongs corrected, names cleared, truths spoken aloud in rooms that once ignored them. But I've learned that real closure isn't a courtroom verdict. It's what you build in the silence that follows. Months after the estate settled, I stood in front of a small crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony at Second Ledger. It wasn't glamorous, just a modest building in a quiet neighborhood, but it was full of light, full of purpose. As I looked at the families in the room, mothers holding budgets, they finally understood, siblings grappling with what love and boundaries should look like. I felt something shift in me. I wasn't just healing. I was helping others heal too. Kyle, he didn't come to the opening, but I heard through the fiduciary that he'd entered another rehab facility, this time court mandated. Maybe it would stick. Maybe it wouldn't. I no longer carried that responsibility. It wasn't mine to bear. I visited my parents' grave not long after. I didn't go to scold or demand answers. I went to say goodbye to the version of me that always needed their approval, their acknowledgement. "I'm okay now," I whispered. "You don't have to worry anymore." The wind rustled the leaves, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel hollow. I felt free. Sometimes, the justice we seek doesn't come in the form of revenge. Sometimes, it comes when we stop needing someone else to see our worth, because we finally see it ourselves. And in that quiet clarity, I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the woman who turned betrayal into legacy, and I was just getting started.